interesting kind of gap between ideal and practice. No, it's called hypocrisy and mendacity. Story. Reference to the indigenous peoples and their precious babies and their land being dispossessed. References to savages, yes, but nothing to ways in which they can contribute to the new experiment taking place. It's deodorized. We gon' keep it funky. We gon' keep it real. You see, let's talk about the indigenous peoples. From 1492, World War I began, and it's still going on today. Let's talk about the enslaved Africans, not because black people have some monopoly on truth and goodness. And you can look at me and see black folk don't have a monopoly on beauty. Proud of what I got, you know. No, we're talking about the humanity. Black, white, red, yellow, whatever. They count. Turn to a deodorized story. Certain folk don't count at all. They don't matter. That's why race matters. Black people and red people and yellow people, they matter in the same way anybody else matters. Not by putting others down, but recognizing we're involved in a Socratic quest for truth, small t. No one has a monopoly on truth, capital T. Concern about goodness, small g, beauty, small b. And that's what critical inquiry is all about. And it takes courage to engage in that kind of quest for truth. And I come from a tradition that says the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. There is no truth in the emphatic sense. The great Theodore Adorno talks about this on page 18 of Negative Dialectics. He's right. He gets it from Hebrew scripture. He's a half-Jewish brother, and he understands the prophetic impulse that comes out of the legacy of Jerusalem. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. And anybody who has the courage to engage in the fallible quest for truth has to come to terms with suffering. This is true in our own personal lives. You can tell lies about yourself and look at the mirror and, like Narcissus, smile. But you know the truth about yourself. You know the lies, you know the wounds, you know the scars, you know the bruises, and you never want to grow unless that you wrestle with it. So your fears begin to die, insecurities begin to die, your anxieties begin to die, to the degree to which you can straighten your back up, like they did in Liberation Square, Cairo, Egypt. And it begins with the person. I begin by finger pointing and name calling. It begins with who you are. When you look inside of you, you see the deposits of the society in which you live, the history that has shaped you, precious families, the mosques, the churches, the synagogues, the civic institutions, the mass media that bombards one. How do you get some critical distance from it so that you're able to begin to grow in a courageous way? And the fascinating thing about Socrates is one, of course, he never wrote a word, and I do not recommend that among the students here at Mercer County Community College. I want you to be Socratic, but not in that particular sense. Fascinating about Socrates, even though he represents so much of the best of the legacy of Athens, is that he's never, ever depicted as shedding a tear. Looking at the major depictions and representations of Socrates in Plato's profound dialogues, in Xenophon's more didactic dialogues, or in Aristophanes' the satirical depiction of Socrates in the clouds. These are the major sources that we have to gain access to somebody called Socrates. He never sheds a tear, never cries. And for me, especially one who comes tradition of a blues people, enslaved people, a Jim Crow people, a Jane Crow people, a hated people, a despised people, a people who've been taught to hate themselves and told they have the wrong hips and lips and noses and hair texture and skin pigmentation, who've been told they're less beautiful and less intelligent. That's the vicious lie of white supremacy that is so fundamentally shaped so many precious black peoples in brown and yellow. That particular tradition is in part about tears connected to critical inquiry. So something's lacking in Socrates. Much as I love Socrates, I always say to myself, no, there's a key sweat moment. Something just ain't right. Anybody who's never cried has never loved anybody.
All right.
You would say, well, Socrates married. Yes, he married his Xanthippe, had 3 sons. Well, he must have cried. He just didn't pick it up in the stories. But anybody who loves somebody, love your mama and your daddy and your precious children, when they're in trouble or when they pass, you might shed a tear because self-mastery is not an appropriate disposition toward the passing of a loved one. You allow it to overflow. And this is crucial, fundamental. That's why, in part, the legacy of Jerusalem is so very important. Hebrew scripture begins with what? Cries of affliction. Cry is an attempt to shatter the numbness, to shatter any cold-heartedness and mean-spiritedness. When Amos says, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, you can even see the tears streaming. See it in Isaiah, what he has to say. By the time you get to that 1st century Palestinian Jew named Jesus, what is it? He weeps twice for Lazarus and Jerusalem. Why? Because he loves so. Not loving in the abstract. He loves so. And part of the challenge, and this is one of the great gifts of black people in America and to the world, how do you bring together the spirituality of genuine Socratic questioning with the spirituality of genuine loving and giving and great compassion in the face of catastrophic circumstances, of American terrorism, of slavery for 244 years, and American terrorism of Jim and Jane Crow for 90 years, and every 2.5 days for 50 years, some black child, or black woman, or black man swinging from some tree, the southern fruit the southern trees bear that Billie Holiday sang about, and the Jewish brother Maripol writing the lyrics. How do you sustain the commitment to the courage to think critically and the courage to love in the face of that kind of terrorism, trauma, stigmatism, disenfranchisement, and so forth and so on? There's something about trying to hold on to the best of a legacy, a human legacy. And I don't believe Athens and Jerusalem have a grand monopoly on truth. Our Eastern traditions have much to teach us. African traditions connected to Middle Eastern and Mediterranean and Athenian traditions have much to teach us. But for those of us who grew up in the United States, especially in the last 40 or 50 years, know that if we're going to keep alive a fragile experiment in democracy where everyday people are viewed as having a dignity and a sanctity and their voices ought to make a difference in the shaping of their destinies, then there has to be some connection between the questioning and the compassion. When you actually think, man, examples of spirituality, of genuine questioning and spirituality of genuine compassion, I could just turn on John Coltrane's The Love Supreme right now and sit down. That's what it is. Socratic questioning about himself, society, and the world, and a love supreme in the face of institutionalized hatred of white supremacy. I could turn on Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. Spring 1971. I can just pick up any essay by James Baldwin, shot through questioning and bearing witness to compassion. That's courage, deep courage. And part of the problem in our day is that in our market-driven society, obsessed with titillation and stimulation, with a culture of superficial spectacle, obsessed with celebrity and connectivity, spiritually empty. About this movie I saw the other day, The Social Network. Anybody see The Social Network? I read the New York Times. This film was about the triumph of the human spirit. I say, which film did you see?
You can bring that closer to you.
It's what happens when you orient a whole generation around the notion of being the smartest in the room, with no concern about courage